Carlos looked down at the little girl in his arms with his deep eyes, not saying any words. Alice thought that he didn't hear it clearly. She rubbed against his arm with her face, bathed in tears. She was just like a kitten looking for a warm and comfortable position, whispering softly in his arms, "I'm still very clean. If you don't mind, you can possess me now." Because of her words, he felt bitter in his heart. He held her tight subconsciously. When he touched her delicate soft skin, his muscles tensed instantly, then his lower abdomen tightened. He turned over and pressed her on the soft bed. Ding! Wisnovel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Her long black hair was like scattered seaweed, falling on the white pillow. His fingers, gently, little by little, stroked her soft hair. In his deep black eyes, there was the reflection of her pale face. She closed her eyes slowly. Her long eyelashes were wet with tears. She bit her lower lip lightly, which made her lips look more delicate and crimson. It seemed that she was inviting him to taste it. He lowered his head. He could not help but approach her soft lips. However, Alice suddenly opened her eyes when she felt his heavy breath. She pushed Carlos away and rushed into the bathroom, wrapped in the quilt. She rubbed her body hard under the shower. Only when her skin was rubbed red, she felt that she had finally washed clean. But she couldn't wash the bruises off. She raised her head, letting the warm water rinse her face. Last time, she was also in Carlos's room like this, washing off the smell of Bruce under the fast-flowing water of the shower. That disgusting devil. Wrapped in a bath towel, she rushed to Carlos, who was still in bed. This time, she was up, and he was under her. Her long wet hair fell on his neck, making him feel itchy and comfortable. It sparked circles of ripples in his heart, and he could not calm down. He raised his thick eyelashes, looked at the burning fire in her clear eyes, and then he fell silent. "I've washed clean. We can get started." Without hesitation, she went at him, found his lips, and kissed him. That night, she also said the same thing. Although he was a clean freak, strange enough, he didn't think she was dirty, and he couldn't resist her touch. When he heard her saying that, he even got some strange feeling in his heart, and he actually wanted to hold her tight in his arms. Her kisses were still so clumsy, she didn't get much progress since the first time, but it generated his burning desire once again. It was like the fierce storm, leaving him no sense of self-control. He held her thin body deeply in his powerful chest, and he opened his mouth to bite her lips. He took the initiative immediately. Under his passionate kisses, she gradually threw in the towel. She didn't resist, and she even responded to him slightly. Her clear eyes were covered with lust. She looked at his beautiful bruised face dreamily. She actually thought that the bruise added more animal magnetism to him. She couldn't help falling under his wild breath, and there was no chance to turn over. She just fell all the way to it. He turned over and pressed her under him, kissing her wildly and affectionately, but he suddenly let go of her. He looked at her with his red eyes, and his voice was abnormally hoarse. It was his last sense before he finally lost control. "Are you sure you really want to give it to me?" Alice's eyes were firm as rocks. "I'm sure." He didn't hesitate to kiss her lips again. He was crazy and didn't leave her any other choices. His movements were so gentle, as if it would hurt her. He lingered on her body, and everywhere his fingers flicked through, lit up a bunch of fireworks inside her body, feeling gorgeous and magnificent. Her hands firmly clung to his strong back, making her fingers look more delicate, beautiful, and lovely on his tan skin. He breathed heavily by her ear. The dreamy and passionate atmosphere enveloped her, which made her feel floating slowly. It was wonderful, like sleeping on the clouds. The heavenly feeling made her lose her control. She gave a charming moan. After a low groan, the world was peaceful again. He was full of sweat, but he didn't want to take a bath right now. He wanted to hold her from behind as if this little girl in his arms had become a part of his body. He didn't want to leave her for a moment. Alice closed her eyes wearily. Her body was weak, with no strength at all. She couldn't move, nestling in his chest with his sweat soaking her back. She was so tired that she wanted to sleep in his arms. Her mind gradually drifted away, and she could not hear clearly what he whispered in his ear. "Are you sure you didn't hide in my arms to escape from Master Cook?" Alice nodded weakly. She did not know whether she was answering him or admitting it in her heart. She was half asleep, not knowing how much time had passed. Suddenly, she felt that the person next to her was gone. She hurriedly opened her eyes, worrying that Carlos's appearance was a dream, and she was still hunted by Bruce. It was very dark in the room, which made her heart sink. But then she saw that yellow lamp on the desk in the corner of the large living room was on. She finally saw Carlos, who was reading the papers behind the desk. He had dealt with the bruises on his face, and the room smelled of disinfectant. Alice clutched at the quilt on her body firmly and looked at Carlos quietly without making a sound. She always thought that a man who works hard is the most attractive one. If that man happened to have a handsome face, she couldn't resist. She lowered her long eyelashes. Her body was sore, and it seemed that Carlos's smell was still lingering on her lips and teeth, along with some faint mixed smell of tobacco and cologne. All of a sudden, she couldn't understand herself. Why did she plunge into Carlos's arms when she was desperate and helpless? It seemed that in her mind, she had considered Carlos as her safe harbor where she can escape from troubles. In the past, only David could give her such a sense of security. Since when had it become Carlos? She couldn't figure it out. Carlos was focusing on those piled up papers. He did not look up, but he he knew that Alice was awake. Looking at the papers in his hand, he asked, "What are you looking at?" Alice lay on the bed in a hurry, covering half of her face with the quilt. She was ashamed to face him so soberly after they had slept together. He stopped talking, and she also pretended to be asleep. The room was quiet, except for the sound of him flipping through the papers. After a long time, the copper clock on the wall swayed, making a heavy dull sound. It was already 2 o'clock in the morning. Under the thick heavy curtains, it was no longer a dark night, but he was still working tirelessly. Don't you feel tired?" She wanted to care about him and let him go to bed earlier, but he misinterpreted what she said. He looked at her, who was in bed, and curled up his lips with a subtle smile. "Men are born to be animals that conquer women. How will I feel tired?" Alice blushed and shouted angrily, "I just want you to have a rest." "Oh." He raised his heavy eyebrows and smiled wickedly. "What a difficult girl to serve. Haven't I satisfied you?" Alice's cheeks turned red completely. Seeing him stand up, she hurriedly wrapped herself with the quilt and waved. "Nope, I'm already tired." He smiled and walked 2 steps forward. Seeing that she backed away timidly, he could not help laughing, but he suddenly turned around, went to the bar, and poured a glass of water. He took a mouthful of water and raised the glass. "I'm thirsty. I come to get some water." Alice stuck out her tongue secretly and breathed a sigh of relief, and he sat back at his desk and began to deal with those papers. She couldn't help feeling that a successful person like him really needed to pay more efforts than ordinary people did. "You should sleep now," he said. Alice's sleepiness had already gone. She still sat at the head of the bed looking at him, who was shrouded with light. She couldn't help asking, "Do you often stay up all night?" She thought that was not good for health. "I have a strict routine, but I have to make my schedule available recently, so I'm very busy," he said as he wrote on the papers. "Are you going out? Are you going out?" Alice suddenly became nervous. What should she do if Bruce came to her again when he left? Instead of answering her, he looked up and stared at her silently for a long time. Then he looked down at the computer in front of him, received the mail, and printed it out. "I didn't disrupt your sleep, did I?" he said. Alice shook her head immediately. Then she saw him taking out a remote control, and a soundproof glass door descended slowly in front of the bed. "I'm used to living alone, so my office desk is in my bedroom." The glass partition came down completely, and she could no longer hear his voice. She could only look at him under the dim yellow light through the transparent glass window. She continued to look at him quietly until the sky outside the window gradually brightened, but she still didn't feel sleepy. Alice didn't know when she fell asleep. When she woke up, it was already light outside. She looked at the copper clock on the wall. It was already 9 o'clock. She hurriedly got up, picked up Carlos's shirt, and put it on. Carlos was tall. The hemline of his shirt was at her thigh, perfectly covering her most private body part and showing her slender legs. She looked at Carlos behind the glass window, and he actually fell asleep on his desk. Groping on the glass window for a long time, she finally found a button. She pressed it lightly, and the glass window slowly went up. "It's really advanced," Alice said impressively when she saw that there was no trace of glass windows on the ceiling. Seeing Carlos sleeping heavily, she took the blanket and put it on him quietly. She was kind-hearted, but he woke up alert. He pinched her delicate wrist, and it hurt so much that she cried out, "It hurts!" Carlos's blurred eyes gradually woke up from his sleep, and he hurriedly loosened his hand. "It's you!" Alice couldn't help wondering, "Who do you think it is?" There was a trace of daze in his eyes for a moment. He didn't answer her. He looked at his wristwatch. It was already 9 o'clock. "We missed breakfast time." He took Alice to the bathroom. "Get washed, and we'll have breakfast." "Do you want to wash with me?" "No." Alice struggled quickly, but he had opened the bathroom door and dragged her in. Washing together saves time. In spite of Alice's resistance, Carlos pressed her on the wall of the bathroom. He looked up and down at her, who was wearing a loose and slack shirt for men. His eyes wandered around the top button she had fastened. Although the buttons were all fastened, her beautiful neck and sexy collarbone were still exposed at the collar. Alice was frightened. She folded her hands over her collar, preventing his fiery eyes from seeing it. Carlos curled up his lips. His eyes gradually moved down and finally fell on the hemline of the shirt. Her slender and delicate legs were very attractive. This damned little girl. Didn't she know it was very tempting to dress like this? Alice hurriedly closed her legs and asked him in a panic, "What are you looking at? You can dress like this only in front of me in the future," he said possessively. Alice blinked in bewilderment. Seeing how ignorant she was, he couldn't help being angry, and he began to unbutton her shirt. "I still don't want to take a shower with you. You go first, and I'll finish soon." Alice rushed out, but she was so anxious that she just hit the bathroom door. Carlos was enjoying the look of her covering her head, embarrassed. The smile on his lips tugged at the wound on his face, and the pain made him cry out, "Is it still hurt?" "I think the swelling has gone down. It shouldn't be that hurt anymore." She suddenly got nervous and rushed to check the wound on his face. "You are caring about me?" With a beautiful smile on his lips, he put his hand around her slender waist. Then he turned around and fixed her on the wall again. Alice's face flushed with rage. "You cheat." Carlos smiled, and he didn't explain. There were bruises on his face, but actually, there were bleeding wound inside. Such a wound would take several days to heal. All is fair in war. You can only be captured captured obediently when you walk into the trap. He ripped open her shirt, crystal buttons scattered all over the floor, making a clear and pleasant jingle on the marble floor. "Ah!" Alice exclaimed and hurriedly covered her body, but the shirt was still ripped off by him, and she was completely naked in front of him. Alice blushed with shame. She was so panicked, and she didn't know how to react. "Aren't you going to have breakfast? The food will be cold if you keep wasting time. Then, we go straight to lunch." When Carlos got rid of his clothes and stood in front of her naked, she closed her eyes immediately. She dared not look at his perfect, strong body. Her heart was pounding. She couldn't say whether she wanted to resist or she had some expectations. Strange enough, before she slept with him, she was only a little shy when she saw a naked body. After all, it was nothing more than a body. But now, her heart was beating wildly, and her body was burning. She wanted to find something cool to ease this uncomfortable feeling. Such a change made her ashamed and annoyed. She wanted to find a crack to slip in. There was a look of interest in Carlos's eyes. His strong body approached her. He rubbed against her gently. "What? Don't want it? You looked pretty hungry last night." Alice's cheeks were red all the way to her neck as if she was standing upside down. "You!" Her hands were against his chest. She didn't want him to get closer, but he was not willing to give up. He wouldn't be satisfied until there was no distance between them. "You said you want to be my woman. It is just the beginning, and you want to back off now?" His hoarse voice was breathing gently in her ear, making her shiver all over. She felt numb, and such feeling was running through all her body along her ear. Alice was too nervous to speak. His burning body clung to her slightly cool body, which felt indescribably comfortable and pleasant. He took all her energy and strength away in an instant, and all her resistance seemed to be tempting him to go further. What? He curled up his lips. His lips went from her cheeks to the corner of her lips. He tasted her shallowly, which made her linger between longing and disappointment. He tormented her consciousness and made her choose between rejection and obedience. Alice quickly took a deep breath to regain her consciousness. "I have to go back to the hospital. It's already too late." It's disappointing to make excuses now. His burning palms lingered around her slender waist. He had to admit that he was mesmerized with the little girl's body, especially the faint pleasant fragrance she wore. It was a fresh smell that he had never tasted before. It was not some famous bathing perfume. It had the fragrance of jasmine. He could see white jasmines when he closed his eyes. "It is still the daytime. We should not." Before she could finish her words, his lips covered her mouth and took away all her voice. He went all the way in powerfully, as if he was going to swallow her. He pressed her body tightly into his chest. Alice lost her armor in an instant and fell under his powerful penetration. Her white back rubbed against the bathroom wall. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror was swaying. She lost herself in her blurred vision. After the sex, she fell into his arms, soaked with sweat. She held him tight so that she didn't fall powerlessly on the ground. She was ashamed to look up at him. She could only lower her head and continue to nest in his arms. The shower was opened. The warm water gently rinsed their body, washing away the sweat after the passion. He looked at her with a smile in his eyes. His short black hair clung to his head with some water drops, which softened his angular face. He was just like an ordinary handsome man who didn't seem so distant now. Sometimes, Alice wondered if all of this was just a dream. She actually had that kind of relationship with the most powerful man in a city. Although she had not personally proved his power, nor did she see the scary side of him as everybody said. She knew that a man maneuvering his way to the top at the age of 30 must have a cold-blooded handling and a strong heart. She stood there, absently. She didn't even realize she had helped her dry her body. Now he was helping her dry her long wet hair carefully. She suddenly looked up and saw him in the mirror. Her heart softened again. Something just came in her heart so easily. She bit her lips, lowered her head, and said in a low voice, "That ring." The words came to her lips, but she stopped. Because she felt the big hand helping her dry her hair suddenly stopped, and it hurt her scalp. She didn't say anything. She just waited for his reply in silence. When he finished drying her hair, he opened the bathroom door. Ben had prepared some clothes. Carlos handed the clothes to Alice, which were a white t-shirt and a pair of jeans. It was not the famous brand that Carlos would give her before. It was just the ordinary cheap one that you could buy everywhere on the street. Alice was kind of shocked. She didn't hanker after the expensive stuff he gave her, but she didn't know why he would suddenly pay attention to her preferences. Or was there something behind it? Alice shook her head. She felt that she had thought too much, so she quickly put on the clothes and went out of the bathroom. Carlos was also dressed. He was now doing up the crystal buttons on his shirt. Today, he was wearing a white shirt and a pair of light blue trousers. He looked fresh and energetic, but there was no more gentle expression on his face that he had when they were in the bathroom. He got his usual cold face on again, which made Alice feel that he was distant again. "Why do you want the ring back?" Carlos looked at Alice and asked. "Because it belongs to somebody else." Alice looked at him firmly. "Now that it's given to me, it's mine." Carlos fastened the buttons and selected the papers for work on the desk. "But I gave it to you by accident." Alice followed up and looked at his tall back. Carlos stopped, looked back at Alice, with some kind of distance in his eyes, as if she had touched his sensitive nerves. "When I get something, I never return it easily. immediately. What logic is that? My logic, he replied in a domineering manner. But that's not your thing. It's not your thing either. Why do you want it so badly? In Carlos's indifferent tone, there was a trace of annoyance. Remember, I'm a businessman. I'm trying to do nothing but gain profit. Alice couldn't speak for a while, but if she couldn't return the ring, Bruce would entangle her forever. You did give me 10 million, but I also dedicated my precious things. I was drunk, and I gave the ring to the wrong person. Now, I have to get it back to the owner. Carlos took all the papers he needed, walked to Alice, and looked down at her. I haven't admitted that you are my woman. Don't try to bargain with me. Even if you're my woman, you can't. Alice felt a sharp pain in her heart. Carlos passed by her and walked out of the room. She stood there in a daze, unresponsive. It was like all her beautiful dreams breaking into countless pieces in an instant. Even she tried hard to catch them with her hands, she would only get bloody palms. She drifted out of the Royal City Hotel. For the first time, she forgot she might be spotted, and people might say something terrible about her. Those people did whisper when she walked all the way out. They said that she seemed to be the very girl in the video, causing the relationship between Jones family and Cook family group to break completely. She arrived at the door of the hotel, and Ben stopped the car in front of her. Miss Oliver, the boss asked me to take you back. Alice took a look at Ben, went around his car, crossed the sidewalk, and walked straight to the bus stop. After the sex, he actually said such hurtful words. Although she had thick-skinned, she would not accept his favor anymore. She got on the bus, but Ben still followed her all the way to the hospital. Why are you still following me? She asked. Because when she got to the hospital, Ben actually got out of his car and followed her up. Boss told me to take you back to the hospital in person, Miss Oliver. Boss also said that he wanted to have dinner with you in the evening. Ben relayed Carlos's instructions. I won't go. Alice left him a few words and ran into the hospital in a hurry. She didn't want to have any contact with Carlos anymore. Her mother's operation was an intense preparation. Alice swept away all her unhappiness. She was now busy signing several consents with Evan, so she forgot about what happened with Carlos. She was curious why the hospital didn't have such complex detailed preparations for the other patients on the same floor who also had kidney replacement surgery. She asked Evan why the hospital attached so much importance to her mother's operation, but Evan just smiled. The hospital attaches great importance to every patient. His answer was obviously prevarication. Alice wanted to ask more, but Evan said to her, the 5 million you gave to the hospital will be returned to you later. Does the donor really want nothing from this? Alice almost jumped up excitedly. If this was the case, she could repay David's money with a large balance. She decided in her mind that, in order not to let Carlos look down upon her, she would return all the money left to Carlos. She couldn't pay off the money used to hospitalize her mother, but she would never use his money. The hospital has arranged another donor whose kidney is healthy. There is a high survival rate. If nothing goes wrong, your mother will survive for more than 10 years or even 20 years without suffering from her old illness. Evan put the signed consents into the pocket of his white coat. Really? This was great news. Alice grabbed Evan's arm excitedly. Dr. Reed, can you tell me the phone number of the donor? I want to thank him face to face. He is the lifesaver of our family. If there are any sequelae after the donation, I will take full responsibility. Evan adjusted the gold glasses on the bridge of his nose and said with a smile, people with healthy kidney are also very healthy. There will be no sequelae. A kidney is completely enough for his body metabolism. You don't have to think about the sequelae. The donor asked for his information to be kept confidential. So, we can't give you his information. You just wait patiently for a successful operation. Alice returned to the ward happily, and there was also a refreshing smile on Sarah's face. In the afternoon, she went to school to ask for leave. She had to be in the hospital for her mother these days. She walked out of the campus when she met May and her two friends at the school gate. May saw the smile on Alice's face, and she said loudly, Cinderella finally got the prince, and her lips curl up to the sky. Her two friends cast her a disdainful look and chimed in with May. That's right. If someone like her can get David's heart, she will be out of the slum for good. She must be laughing. She climbed so high, but one day she will fall. At that time, no one will pity her even she cries. They laughed together and passed by Alice. Alice pursed her lips and kept her smile on the face. She would not let their taunt ruin her good mood. She got on the bus when Emma called. Emma had seen the video on the internet, and she was so angry. She threatened to give Emily a lesson and revenge for Alice. Emma, I think Uncle Andy grounds you because he wants you to moderate your temper. If you fight again, I'm afraid Uncle Andy will tie you up to study in America. Emma sighed, and then she sincerely offered her congratulations. Alice, congratulations. I wish Aunt a successful operation. When I go to your house, she will be able to make me delicious sweet and sour pork. Also, make dumplings for you, stuffed with pork and coriander that you like. By the way, Alice, Amanda called me yesterday. She was not in a very high spirit, and she spoke strangely. If you see her, ask her in person that if something is wrong. Emma thought of Amanda's strange behavior yesterday, and she was kind of worried. No way, didn't she just come back from the trip with James Carter? I've on the phone with her twice, and she seemed pretty happy. I've been busy lately. I haven't seen her yet. Alice hung up and dialed Amanda's number, but she didn't answer. She went back to the hospital. Her mother was doing the last dialysis before the operation, and she was busy sending the inspection reports and taking the test sheets until the late night. She was so tired that she sat in the corridor chair. She drank mouthfuls of water, looked down at her phone, and she saw the message from David in her phone. Alice, these are the key points of the exam. You can review them first, and you will surely pass the exam. You don't have to worry. Just take care of your mother in the hospital. I'll be there for you tomorrow. Alice smiled, feeling warm. She opened the email sent by David, received it, and saved it. It was no surprise that David had got the key points of the exam. His family had both money and power. She was about to open the file and see what the key points were when a phone call came in, and she just pressed the answer button inadvertently. It was Carlos's call. She was about to hang up when Carlos's beautiful and magnetic voice came from the other side. Come out. Alice bit her lips. It was really hard for her to say no to such a light and domineering voice. She didn't say a word, and Carlos was silent too. After a while, Alice summoned up her courage. She was about to decline when his voice came from the other end again. I don't want to drag you out of the hospital. She walked out of the hospital, standing on the street with bright street lights. She did not see Carlos. She was about to turn around and go back to the hospital when her phone rang again. Go left and pass a kiosk. I am waiting for you at the next corner. He had arranged all the routes she would take next as if he had seen her. He hung up immediately. He was completely ordering her. When Alice found a black Bentley parked at the corner, she stood in front of the car and looked at Carlos in the car. She didn't get in the car. He chose such a secret place to meet because he was afraid of being seen, which made her felt bitter in the heart. Carlos suddenly hooted his horn, which scared Alice. She was so scared that she stopped drifting away. She finally focused on him, and he curled up his lips with satisfaction. He crooked her fingers to beckon Alice, who was standing still there. Alice opened the car door and sat in the passenger seat. She said in a cool voice, "What's the matter?" Carlos smiled. Burn the bridge after crossing it? I didn't. Alice thought he was the one who hurt her with his words first. Carlos ignored her discontent. He drove into the night and head for a quiet, unique Chinese restaurant. He was still a spendthrift because he booked the whole restaurant. In such a large restaurant, they were the only two people eating, for delicate light dishes and a bowl of rice. He ate with relish, but Alice had no appetite. Don't like it? He used the chopsticks gracefully. There was no sound between the dishes and chopsticks. His posture was very standard. She thought that he should have received professional training. People like him who even need professional training to eat would only make Alice feel more distant. She shook her head and waited quietly for him to finish his meal. Carlos put down his chopsticks and wiped his mouth gracefully. "You done. I can go back to the hospital, right?" Finishing her words, she stood up and left. Carlos did not detain her or say a word. Alice walked to the door and looked back at Carlos, who was still sitting on the dining table in the transparent glass window. His back was straight and beautiful. It was so charming that she could hardly move her eyes away. Somehow, she felt her heart a little empty. He didn't stop her. That was exactly what she wanted, right? But why she was upset now? She quickened her pace to get rid of these complicated thoughts. She found the bus stop, sat on the bench, and waited for the bus. When a black Bentley drove slowly through the street in front of her, she saw his sharp, beautiful profile in the car. Without looking at her, he drove away quietly. The feeling of emptiness in her heart suddenly sharpened. Her heart was also gone as he drove away in his car. The light of the operating room was off at last. Evan came out a little tired. He took off his surgical mask and smiled at Alice, who had been waiting in front of the operating room nervously. The operation has been very successful. Alice was so excited that her tears fell down in an instant. It succeeds. David, the operation is successful. She hugged David and shouted happily. My mother's operation succeeds. Succeeds. David, we did it. Congratulations, Alice. David also sighed with relief and laughed happily with her. Leon jumped up and down, clapped his hands, and cheered. Oh, my mother is recovered. She's good now. We can go home. When the nurse heard the noise in the corridor, she came to stop. No noise in the hospital, but Evan raised his hand and stopped the nurse. SHH, they're so happy. Make an exception. Evan made a gesture of silence to the nurse. He stretched himself tired. Seeing Alice smiling happily, he also smiled with gratification. Sarah was placed in the ICU ward for supervision. Alice could only stand outside the window in a bacterial isolation suit, looking at her mother with tubes sticking out of her. She was still in a coma of anesthesia. David beckoned to her outside the door. Alice turned around and went out, but her head was down. Why are you still crying? Your mother's operation is a great success, and you should be happy about it. David held her face gently and helped her wipe the tears off her face. I'm so happy. Alice looked up at David and said, Thank you, David. You've been there for me in the hospital. David put his hands in his trousers pocket and looked at her with a smile. His lips were slightly pursed. Stop crying if you are really thankful. Alice laughed. She clenched her fist and hit David's shoulder weightlessly. Her phone rang. It was a text message. Alice took a check on it. It was from Bruce. Alice, you are pretty happy now, right? The smile on your face is a real eyesore. His voice sent a chill up Alice's back. Her body cooled down in an instant. She looked around in a panic, but there was no one in the long corridor. She didn't see Bruce standing in the corner at the end of the corridor. There was no light there, and darkness hung over his tall back. He was like a terrible ghost in the dark night. Since the operation began, he had been standing there. He saw the doctor announce successful operation to Alice, and he saw Alice holding David excitedly. All the scenes made his rage more and more intense. He wished he could destroy all the smiles on her face. He took out his phone and posted a set of photos on the internet. In the darkness, he curled up his lips evilly, turned away, and left the hospital. Bruce drove away from the hospital, but suddenly someone darted out in front of the car, so he stepped on the brake at once. When he recognized the people outside the car clearly, his face turned dark immediately with strong disgust. "Why, it is you again." Mark rushed to the car window, kept bowing and apologizing. "Master Cook, give me another chance. Please give me another chance. If you don't cooperate with Oliver family, I will go bankrupt. I will return the diamond ring to you soon. Alice, she is too young and too thoughtless. Master Cook, you pay special attention to her for this half a year. You not only help her transfer to another school, but also pay her mother's bill in such an expensive private hospital. You even give her living expenses. This girl is not grateful at all. What else do you have to say?" Bruce's patience had been exhausted. Just as he was about to start the car, Mark grabbed the door handle and shouted, "I'll let her apologize to you face to face. I will do whatever you want." Bruce put his hand on the steering wheel and knocked it from time to time. He looked at the bruises on his face in the rearview mirror of the car, which could only be covered by the big black sunglasses. This game had been upgraded. Carlos was even part of it now. How could an apology be enough? He raised the corner of his lips and gave a wicked smile. Mark misinterpreted Bruce's meaning. Seeing Bruce's car go away, he went to the hospital to find Alice. "Who is he? He wants me to apologize to him?" Alice refused her father's request directly. "Alice, help me out this time, only this time." Mark had no way else to go. Otherwise, he would not be here begging Alice like this. "I didn't do anything wrong. Why should I apologize? I don't have time." Alice ignored Mark and was about to go back to the hospital, but Mark grabbed her. "Don't you understand? Master Cook has done so much for you. Don't you understand what he means?" Mark said softly again, "Why did Master Cook give you the diamond ring? It's obvious that he wants to propose to you. You are really ungrateful. You accept the ring, but you don't agree with him. How can Master Cook be happy? Just listen to me. Go to apologize to Master Cook and cheer him up. He is the young master of Cook family group. If you two work out, you will be rich for the rest of your life. Your mother and your brother will have a better life too." Alice would never believe that Bruce gave her the diamond ring to propose to her. "You only say that for your own good. Don't make so many excuses. I am your father, your biological father. I am already over 50. Do you really have the heart to see me end up tramping on the streets? And your little brother, he is so young. We need money for his school fee, right?" Alice sneered. "First, you have never done the father's duty to me for so many years. Second, I don't have a little brother. My elder brother is now with my mother in the hospital. Third, if we can't afford such a good private university, he can go to an ordinary university. Fourth, you think he is still very young when he is 19? When I was 19, I had 3 jobs a day." Alice got rid of Mark and ran back to the hospital. She didn't check the messages on her phone. It had been ringing for some time. She was afraid that it might be messages from Bruce, so she just turned off her phone discomposedly. Sarah woke up after the operation. She was in good condition, and she could also eat some liquid food. Alice went to the special canteen in the hospital and gave her mother some rice porridge. When she came back, Mark was in the ward, and there was even a beautiful fruit basket and a bunch of her mother's favorite lilies on the table. There was a different smile on Sarah's face that she didn't usually have. Seeing Alice come in, she hurriedly wiped the smile off her face. Alice knew that even though her father had had an affair and abandoned her mother before, her mother still loved him at the bottom of her heart. Her mother often said to her that her father abandoned her because he wanted to have a son to carry on his family name. After all, her brother was mentally disabled. She didn't want to quarrel with Mark in front of her mother. She put down the rice porridge and was about to go out, but Mark had stood up. "Sarah, have a good rest. I'm leaving now. I'll come to see you again when I have time. Goodbye, Dad," Leon said affectionately. There was a happy smile on his face because he finally saw his father. Mark stopped, looked back at Leon, who was smiling innocently and naively, and his eyes went red suddenly. Alice wanted to rush to her brother, grasped his waving hand, and told him that this person abandoned them. He was not their father, and he shouldn't have any feelings for him anymore. But how could she have the heart to do such a thing? In her brother's simple world, his dad was busy with his work every day. He didn't come back home often because he was too busy too. Her brother always believed that, although his parents had divorced divorced long ago, and his father had his own family now. He still had a strong attachment to his father. As long as he saw Mark, he would come to him happily. However, Mark ignored all of this. He even disliked her brother because he was mentally retarded. Okay, goodbye. Mark squeezed out the words heavily and hurried out of the ward. Alice saw her brother looking at the door of the ward until Mark's figure disappeared outside the window. She quickly took out a candy and handed it to him. She didn't want to see the disappointment on her brother's face. Brother, you behave well today. You didn't go out to play, and you have been taking care of our mother. Here's your reward. Her brother took the candy and smiled happily. I am so happy today. I see Daddy, and I have candy. In the afternoon, when Alice was reading a book, Sarah finally said in a low voice, Alice, your father said, don't care about him. We went different ways a long time ago, and we don't mind each other's business. Alice knew that Mark was here to make her mother persuade her. Alice, after all, he is your father. Blood is thicker than water. See, your brother still loves him. The kinship is inseparable. Sarah sighed. Your father said that his business partner is your classmate at school, and he has a good relationship with you. He wants you to put in a good word for him and save the Oliver family from the crisis. Just a few words, Alice. Help your father. Although he didn't take care of us all these years, now I see that he really wants to change. Otherwise, he won't arrange for you to transfer to another school, and also arrange for me to live in a private hospital. Alice clutched at the book in her hand firmly. She bit her lips and didn't say anything. Her mother certainly wouldn't know that Bruce was the one who did all of this, not Mark. She really couldn't figure out why Bruce did this. Alice, your brother's situation, you know, neither you nor I can accompany him for his whole life. If you marry someone in the future, and I am old, who will take care of him? Thinking of these, Sarah felt pain in the heart. I will not leave my brother, even if I am married. Nonsense. No one will bring a mentally retarded brother to her husband's home. Then, I will never marry. Alice was absolutely serious. Alice, it's hard for anyone to say anything about the future. Mom and your brother, we can't spoil your life forever. Alice knew what her mother meant. She wanted to plan an exit for her brother. He might have to turn to Mark one day. But let her come to Bruce? It was really hard to say yes. I will think about it. She stood up and went out of the ward. She wanted to go to the park for a walk, but she saw David running towards her. He stood in front of her panting. David, what's going on? When David saw Alice looked confused, he put away the worry on his face and smiled. Nothing. I'm just here to see you. I thought something was wrong because you were running and you are covered with sweat now. Alice took out the tissue and handed it to David, but he didn't take it. I called you, but you've turned the phone off. I thought something happened to you. Alice couldn't help laughing. What would happen to me? I'm in the hospital all day. There were always messages ringing, and I was annoyed, so I turned it off. She took out her phone and was about to turn it on when David suddenly grabbed it. You're going to take the exam, and you should review your lessons now. It's no good playing your phone all day. I'm going to take away your phone. Alice's hand was suddenly empty. He put her phone directly in his pocket. You take away my phone. What other phones can I use? What do you do with a phone? You're staying with your mother in the hospital these days, and you don't need to go to school. If I want to reach you, I'll call the nurse station. David turned around and left, but he thought about it and turned back again. Later, I'll give you a phone that can only receive and make calls. Alice scratched her head confusedly, wondering why David acted so strangely. At this time, two little nurses pushed the trolley past her. They looked at her from time to time and whispered. They laughed so mysteriously. Alice knew they definitely didn't say anything good. Alice thought that they were laughing about the video of her being bullied by Emily at school and saying that she was a modern version of Cinderella or something like that. She didn't care much. After a while, David came back. As expected, he gave her a blue screen mobile phone that could only receive and make calls. Holding the small phone in her hand, Alice didn't know whether she should cry or laugh. David, you are awesome. You can even get such an antique. David dialed her new number. This is my number, remember? And I am the only one who has your new number. You're trying to cut me off from the outside world. Alice thought about it. It was cool to change her number. At least, she wouldn't be haunted by Bruce. It's less than half a month before the exam. Concentrate on your study and don't go anywhere else. Alice nodded obediently, wondering why David, who was always warm as spring water, suddenly became so domineering. I have something else to do. I'm leaving now. Shortly after David left, Amanda rushed into the hospital. Alice, you bad girl. Your mother is in hospital, and you didn't even tell me about it. Alice tilted her head and smiled. The operation has been successful. She can leave the hospital after a few days of observation. Congratulations to me, you bad girl. Amanda hugged Alice. I'm afraid to disturb your good mood of traveling with your boyfriend, so I didn't tell you. Alice also hugged Amanda. She hadn't seen her for more than half a month, and she missed her very much. I am so worried. I called you, but you had turned it off. Amanda was afraid that Sarah would hear her, so she pulled Alice to the corridor and asked her in a low voice, why you get that kind of photos posted on the internet? What photos? Alice didn't understand her at all. Amanda opened her beautiful big eyes wide. Nude pic. Didn't you turn off your phone because of this? Nude pic? Whose? Of course, it's yours. Emma and I are so angry. How can you be photographed naked and you don't even know about it? When Alice saw the photos on the internet, her face turned deathly pale instantly. Although her body on all the photos was pixelated, people could still see its nudity photo. Her face was clearly exposed in the pictures. She was either angry, painful, or helpless. Every expression made people's thoughts throng their minds. People who saw the photos thought that it was expressions of happiness. They couldn't see that she was forced by someone else. And the person in the pictures was Alice. These photos are clearly captured from a video, and only you are in it. Clearly, it's photoshopped. Who did it? Think about it, so that we can call the police. Amanda shook Alice, who was dull, and she slapped on her forehead. Say something. What's going on? Who did such a terrible thing to you? Your boyfriend? How can there be such a fuckboy? It is clear to see that he was forcing you. How did you run into such kind of rubbish? You had suffered a lot with Barry. How can there be another one? Amanda hurriedly covered her mouth. I'm sorry, Alice. I'm so worried that I keep saying something inappropriate. Alice was still unresponsive. Her mind was like a paste right now, completely messy. She had no thoughts at all. She sat in the chair dully, and she finally understood why David took away her phone. He was afraid that she would see these things. The title of those photos was Cinderella's Tactic, coinciding with the hot video of Cinderella maneuvers her way to the top in a city recently. People even gave her a very popular internet nickname, National Cinderella. It was said that her story was very inspirational for girls. Now, when such a scandal came out, it was natural for everyone to think that David, the young master of Joan's family group, was the person who took these photos. They all said that you had to pay the price to date with a rich boy. There was a blast of criticism, saying that she was shameless, and that she actually seduced a man in this way. Alice did not dare to look at those photos again. She clasped her hands around her head in distress. Alice, you're not going to confront the person who did it? How can you live in the future after being set up like this? Your life is ruined. Amanda hugged her. Confront? Go argue with Bruce? She would only get caught up. Carlos could save her once, twice, but he can't happen to show up there the third time to save her. She would not be so stupid, thinking that she could escape Bruce by hiding in Carlos's arms. That devil actually played such a dirty trick to revenge on her. What should she do? She stayed in her mother's ward and didn't dare to go out the whole day. She changed her number, so the phone was very quiet. David sent her several messages, asking what she was doing. She pretended that she didn't know about it and replied to him again and again with the same message, reviewing. The nurse called her and said that there was someone calling to the nurse station, asking for her. She didn't even think about it. She just refused to answer it. But the phone in the nurse station kept ringing over and over. Finally, the nurse was out of patience. We still have a lot of work to do, and we're not your personal phone operator. Alice had to go over there and answer the phone. As expected, it was Bruce. I'm angry. You turn off your phone again. What do you want? Alice shouted angrily. Enjoy it? Get excited? I still got a video of you being naked. He smiled evilly as if he had received the happiest outcome. What do you want from me? Alice was so angry that the tears rolled around her eyes. Why do you always ask me the same thing? Then I'll answer you once. I don't want to do anything. I just don't like you. I don't like to see you smile at other men. Don't like to see you cry in other men's arms. Don't like you yelling at me all the time. That's my business. Why should you care? You have no right to interfere in my life. Bruce suddenly hung up the phone, which made Alice kind of shocked. She sat in the corridor with bright lights alone, leaning against the back of the chair and looking at the bright lights. She felt stinging in her eyes, but she still stared at it. She didn't expect there was a follow-up of those photos. After her nude photos became a hot topic, there was more explosive news spreading the whole internet and the headlines of all the newspapers. There was not only a picture of her being hugged by David, but also a photo of Bruce and her kissing. Everybody was shocked, and they were all talking about it. Alice became the most shameless and flirty woman in a city, or even the whole country. She even hooked up with Bruce, the young master of Cook family group. She became famous now in a bad way. On the third day, all the photos drama finally revealed itself. No one expected that there would be a more legendary person involved in it. A group of photos of Carlos, half naked, holding Alice in his arms with his shirt, shocked the whole country and even the Asia. It never occurred to anyone that Carlos was involved in this drama. He was a legend in the business world and one of the richest men in Asia. Alice, that flirty woman, should even hook up with him. Everybody knew Alice now. Alice knew that Carlos was powerful, but she didn't know how powerful he was. She didn't know that the revealing of her relationship with Carlos could destroy her life completely. She was like an ostrich, hiding in her mother's ward. She pretended not to know it even though it was already a mess outside. On the fourth day, another photo was posted. The one who was behind all of this finally put an end. It was the 9 consecutive pictures of Carlos announcing that she was his new girlfriend when they were having breakfast in the restaurant that morning. Amanda pointed to the photos on the phone. Alice, it's obvious. Look, the date of Master Brown announcing you were his new girlfriend and the date of those nude pictures. Clearly, the person who posted all of it wants to say, when you were dating Master Brown, you were also messing around with many other men. Also, look at this room. Master Cook and Master Brown all showed up in this room in an untidy way. Someone actually said you. Sleep with 2 men? I saw it. Alice felt shocked that she could actually spit out these words so calmly. We have to call the police. It's too much. Amanda was so angry, and she almost cried. Call the police? What should I say? Personal attack? Since he dared to do so, he knew the consequences, and he must have been prepared for it. What's more, he didn't only come at me, he also came at Carlos. Bruce was revenging on her, and Carlos, by his vicious means. She didn't know what happened between Bruce and Carlos, but it had made her the weapon of Bruce to fight against Carlos. Carlos dated a woman with a seedy private life, and it would ruin his reputation. Alice was not a businessman, but she knew the importance of reputation to a famous businessman. Alice, what to do now? If, at this time, Master Brown comes out to claim his innocence, then you are completely done. I heard that there are many journalists in your school right now. Besides, when I passed by your house on the way to the hospital, there are many journalists at your door. But I saw that there are a lot of security guards at the gate of the hospital, blocking all the reporters. Now it seems that the hospital is the safest place. You cannot go out now. This is a noble hospital. Those journalists dare not come in here. They are afraid of offending some powerful people in the hospital. However, this can't work forever. You can hide for a day, but you may not be able to hide for 2 days. Alice put her hands around her head in distress and buried her head in her arms. What else can I do? I feel like the whole world is falling apart. Amanda hugged her, feeling painful. How can this happen? Who did you mess with? Alice was going to have a mental breakdown. She sat in her mother's ward all day. She couldn't concentrate on reading anymore. Even though she was holding the book, she was not reading the words. All she could see was those photos and all those hurtful abuses. Aunt Mary seemed to be very busy recently. She had to go out for more than an hour every morning, afternoon, and evening before she came back. Aunt Mary was Ben's man, and she was her only link with Carlos now. Her phone was in David's hand, and Carlos's phone number was also in it. She really wanted to ask Carlos what he thought. She wanted to know whether he would blame it all on her. She was really afraid that he would do so. She asked Aunt Mary whether she had Ben's number, but she just shook her head. Aunt Mary always talked little. She always did things quietly and never talked much. Alice was sad. She thought maybe those people would no longer pay attention to her if she hid for a few days. Leon went downstairs to play, but he hadn't come back yet. Alice was so worried that she paced about the ward. She let Aunt Olivia look for him, but Aunt Olivia came back, saying she didn't see Leon in the park. Alice couldn't stay in the ward waiting any longer. She wanted to go out to find her brother, but she was afraid of being spotted by the reporters at the gate of the hospital. So, she was going to ask Aunt Olivia to look for her brother again, but there was another phone call at the nurse station looking for her again. The little nurse was a little annoyed. The telephone at the nurse's station has become your private landline. You already got so many rich boyfriends. Don't you tell me you can't even afford a phone? The little nurse said in a low voice, but Alice could still hear her clearly. She picked up the phone. Emily's laughter came from the other end. Alice, it's not easy to find you. If I didn't call the hospital, I really can't find you. What's your matter? Alice was not in the mood to beat around the bush with Emily. If I didn't investigate you, I really didn't know you have a mentally retarded brother. Alice, your brother is very interesting. I said I was going to buy something delicious for him, and he followed me happily. Where did you take my brother? Don't worry. Can I eat your brother? I'm not interested in someone who is mentally retarded. Emily, I wish I could rip off your mouth. Alice rushed back to the ward, grabbing her clothes, hat and gauze mask. She ignored Sarah's questioning and rushed out of the hospital. But Aunt Mary called someone quietly when Alice ran out. Miss Oliver is out. Alice wrapped herself and walked out of the hospital with her head lowered. The security guarded the gate, preventing the reporters, who had been at the gate for 3 days and nights, from entering the hospital. It was pretty hot today, and the reporters had long been exhausted. They huddled in the shade of the trees, feeling drowsy. Alice ran to the snack bar outside the hospital, and she saw her brother sitting on the chair outside the snack bar eating ice cream. Emily was standing in the shade of trees, wearing sunglasses and folding her hands around her chest. She was wearing a miniskirt, which was extremely sexy and cool. She was looking at Alice, who literally wrapped herself as if a good show was about to begin. You finally come out. Emily covered her mouth and laughed. Alice ignored her. She dragged Leon and was about to leave. Sister Alice, the ice cream is delicious. Have a taste. It must be very hot for you. You wear so much. Alice shook her head and wiped the beads of sweat from her brother's forehead. Brother, you eat it. I am not feeling hot. Sister Alice, that beautiful sister is very nice. It's so hot, and she said she would buy me ice cream. Leon smiled at Emily innocently, but Emily snorted with disdain. Alice was very upset. She stood in front of her brother and wanted to drag him back to the hospital. Brother, let's go back to the hospital. Mom is waiting for you. Leon even waved to Emily naively and said goodbye. Emily stepped on her high heels gracefully and walked over to stop Alice. Why are you in such a hurry? The show hasn't begun yet. Wait for yourself. I don't have time. Alice was not nervous. She knew that Emily drew her out for a reason, but it didn't mean she was really not afraid. She was just pretending to be strong and calm. Emily raised her hand and clapped several times. You got some nerve. If there weren't so many many powerful people backing you up. How could you act so wildly? I thought you were just an ordinary girl. It turns out that you got many people behind you. Brother Bruce hates you so much. How did you hook up with Brother Bruce? Oh, yes, with your filthy body. Thinking of the photos of Alice and Bruce kissing, Emily was so angry that she gritted her teeth. Brother Bruce said clearly that he didn't like being touched by others. Why would he kiss Alice? Alice bit her lips. She didn't want to waste her time talking to Emily. She passed by her and was about to leave, but Emily continued to block her way. What's wrong with Brother Bruce? Isn't he afraid to get some kind of infection from your dirty body? Why he just fell into temptation so easily? Emily laughed. I am very curious. What kind of cheap means did you use? Emily, is it interesting? Alice gnashed her teeth in anger. Emily was still laughing. When she learned about the scandal of Alice and the fact that she had become the worst and cheapest woman, she was so happy that she hadn't slept well these days. Don't look at me like that. I'll be frightened. Emily pretended to be afraid and she patted on her heart. I'm afraid that Master Brown will kill me. She laughed again, satirically and happily. Who is Master Brown? If he stamps on his feet, the whole world will shudder. He actually falls under your spell. I kind of admire you. Why are you so good at this? Master Brown refused all the rich ladies in the world. How can he be fascinated with you? Then, Emily's voice turned cold. I didn't expect that the new girlfriend of Master Brown is you. She approached Alice and looked up arrogantly. It's a pity that Master Brown didn't speak for you after such a long time. He just thought you were fresh, and he wanted to play with you for a few days. Do you really think you are the queen on the throne? Alice didn't want to waste her time with Emily. Are you done? If you are done, can I go now? Emily sneered. David is cheated by your pure appearance. In fact, beneath your clean and beautiful appearance, you are just a pile of dirty rubbish. Leon finally understood that they were quarreling, and the beautiful girl who bought him ice cream was bullying his sister. He hurriedly stood in front of Alice. Because of his height, he could keep Alice perfectly behind him. Don't bully Sister Alice. Leon handed over the ice cream he had not finished. I don't want your ice cream. You are not a good person. You bully my sister. Emily whisked off the melted ice cream because it almost ruined her expensive dress. Then she pushed Leon away in disgust. You two are so disgusting. Alice grabbed her brother at once. She couldn't stand someone doing this to her brother. Emily, stop playing here, and it will only make you look more like a loser. What do you say? Emily shouted with anger. I not only took away David, who you like, but also had an affair with Master Cook, who likes you. What's more, Master Brown, who you can't even reach, also has some story with me. I know you're jealous. I will be jealous of you? Alice ignored Emily. She dragged her brother and walked back to the hospital. Emily wouldn't let go of Alice. She shouted at the reporters not far away. Alice is here. A group of exhausted people rushed to Alice and her brother with cameras excitedly. They surrounded them, and the cameras flashed wildly. Alice and Leon had never seen such a scene. Alice was so scared that she plunged into her brother's arms, and she held him tight. Leon was blinded by the flashing lights. He knew that his sister was afraid, and she needed his protection, but he was gradually frightened by the siege of these people. He hugged his sister tight, and his body was shaking. Miss Oliver, what is Master Brown's attitude towards you after the nude photos are exposed? Did Master Brown blow you off after he found out that his girlfriend has such a filthy private life? Miss Oliver, we are all curious. How did you make so many rich men fall under your spell? Master Brown, in particular, he had few pictures exposed, but now there are nude photos of him and you. What do you think about that? Miss Oliver, is it you who is behind all of this? What is your purpose? Say something, Miss Oliver. A group of people shouted, making Alice have no place to hide. Emily stood outside the crowd, with her hands around the chest. She smiled, enjoying the scene of Alice being surrounded. Alice, are you going to cry now? At this time, Emily saw a tall figure coming out of the hospital. The trousers and the shirt were all handmade, which perfectly covered the fine figure of this handsome man. He could attract all the views from far away. Emily took off her sunglasses at once, squinted, and looked over there through the sunlight. She had never seen Carlos in person. She only saw him on some news, but it was only his back or 3/4 of his face. The recent photos about Carlos, which were popular on the internet, were all screenshots from a video. They were not so clear to see. Now she was so excited to see the real person that her heart almost stopped beating. Her eyes were glued to the man who walked like the wind and came with overpowering energy. Carlos. What did it mean that he showed up here? Emily suddenly panicked. Several security guards rushed up to separate the reporters. Carlos put his coat on Alice to prevent people from seeing her. Then he took her into his strong arms. Carlos's sudden appearance made all the reporters stunned, and they forgot to take photos because of his overpowering energy. When they recovered from the shock, they all pressed the shutter crazily. If they captured all the pictures of Carlos, they would get a lot of bonuses. Carlos's dark eyes swept leisurely at them. He was cold like a sword. Those click-click sound of the shutter disappeared in an instant. Carlos stepped out of the crowd. Alice could see nothing now. There was only his special smell on his coat. At that time, she often smelled it inadvertently when she was dreaming. She could not see the road at her feet at all. She was held tight in his arms, and she followed his steps obediently. Even she couldn't couldn't see anything, and she didn't know where he would take her. She felt secure. To rely on him made her feel so safe. She was moved and relaxed, and her tears were about to fall down. She thought he would not show up again, and he would distance himself from her, who had a bad reputation. Today, however, he appeared in front of so many people. Wasn't he afraid that she would destroy his life? She wanted to break away from him, but his arms held her tighter. Don't move. Alice did not dare to move anymore. She followed him obediently. When the reporters saw Carlos walk back to the hospital, they swarmed to him. Ben, with the bodyguards and security guards, lined up to keep the reporters out of the hospital. Ben stood out and said to the reporters with a smile, "Dear journalists, come here to register. Tell me which newspaper and TV station do you come from? Boss Brown said that he would pay special attention to you." Ben's smile was amiable, but it made all the reporters break out into a cold sweat. They stood still and thought carefully. In the press world, they all know that Carlos was extremely difficult to deal with. He didn't want his photos to be published. If someone broke the rule, he or she would disappear from a city for good. Several newspapers and TV stations had been shut down before, not to mention these small reporters. For this reason, Carlos's pictures were rarely seen in newspapers, magazines, and televisions for so many years. Even the people around him were more exposed than him. Even though there were news reports about Carlos, he selected the photos personally and chose one picture that didn't show his face clearly. Only then the reporters dared to publish it. For those who don't want to write down your name, by the old rule, give me the camera. Ben took over many well-equipped cameras with his security guards. Under the painful expression of those reporters, he deleted all the photos. Emily was so angry that she stamped on her feet. She hid behind the tree and recorded all the scenes of Carlos with her phone. She would never post the pictures of Carlos protecting Alice on the internet, which would only make the public envy Alice. But there was a person. If she saw it, she would certainly act on it. That person. She was Jane, the only known girlfriend of Carlos, and she was now going to be engaged with Bruce. Everyone in the celebrity circle knew that Carlos and Jane had dated each other for many years, and they had a pretty good relationship. As for the reason why they didn't work it out in the end, only Carlos and Jane would know. Humph, Alice, you are just a substitute for Master Brown when he is frustrated. The darkness in front of Alice was gone. She saw a very luxurious room, wondering where she was. Suddenly, she saw the logo of Wellbeing Hospital and some medical equipment on the bedside table. It turned out she was in a ward in the hospital. Alice found that Carlos was looking at her, and she lowered her head immediately. She dared not look at his eyes. You didn't do anything wrong. What are you afraid of? Alice bit her lips. She didn't know how to answer. Didn't she have any responsibility for stirring such a drama up? How could he understand her terrible mood now? After so many things happened to her, she really had to think about what she had done wrong. Why don't you just stay in the hospital? What are you doing out there? Carlos asked, with some difficulty moving his body. He sat on the bed and moved little by little. Alice noticed his movements, very slow and strained. He was not as elegant as he was outside the hospital. She raised her one eye and glanced at Carlos secretly. She found that his face was not as ruddy as before, but as pale as he had just recovered from a serious illness. Are you ill? Alice got nervous. Yuri caring about me? There seemed to be a faint smile on his tightly pressed lips. What ails you? Why don't you just have a good rest since you are ill? Why did you go outside? Alice helped him to lie on the bed at once, and then she covered him with a quilt. You forgot what I did too fast. Carlos lay down and finally felt a little less painful. Alice stuck out her tongue. I haven't said thank you. But what's going on with you? It seems pretty serious. Carlos was silent for a while, answered lightly, appendicitis. You've just had an operation, but you still went outside. What if the wound dehisces? Alice was so nervous that she didn't know what to do. Seeing Carlos in pain, she was even more stuck for what to do. The gleam in his eyes slowly softened down when he saw her being so nervous. He said with a subtle smile, it hurts a lot. Or maybe you can help me see if it has opened. Alice bent down at once. She took off the covers and carefully unbuttoned his shirt. When she was about to untie his trouser belt, she froze. Her cheeks were glowing. I'd better call a doctor. Saying so, she turned around quickly and was about to go out. Carlos laughed. He reached out and grabbed her thin wrist. I'm just kidding. Good for you. Alice pouted her delicate lips and glared at him angrily. Seeing the bright light in his dark eyes, she was infatuated with him for a second. Then, she lowered her head and put her hands together. Only you can still laugh in such a situation. She even had the heart to die. You and I both know that the rumors are not true. Why should we ruin our attitude towards life because of their conjectures? Alice was kind of moved. I appreciate your comfort, but I can't be as cool as you. Someone believes in you, and it's all that matter. Suddenly, her eyes met Carlos's dark eyes. She fell right into it as if she was dancing in his beautiful eyes. She was relaxed, and she no longer felt so upset. She didn't know when Director Reed and some attending doctors came in. The nurse asked her to leave the room. She stood outside the door and looked through the window at Carlos, who was surrounded by a group of doctors. She couldn't see him clearly, but she still looked at him in this way. The doctors were examining him, and they were saying something she couldn't hear. The nurses walking around the corridor were all beautiful young girls. They looked at Alice curiously seriously. They didn't say any hurtful words, the way the nurses on the floor where her mother stayed did. They didn't say it, but their eyes gave them away. Alice lowered her head, and her long hair covered her delicate face. Someone believes in you, and it's all that matter. What he said lingered in her ears like the melody of some fine music, beating her heart and letting her heart relax a little bit. But could she really do it? Ignore everybody and get back on her feet? Carlos stayed on the 19th floor of the hospital. Only those with high status could live in such a quiet and luxurious place, which was like a palace. His ward was at the end of the corridor of the hospital. Normally, no one would walk around here. It was very quiet and suitable for rest. Carlos asked her to stay quietly in his ward and accompany him. She knew that accompanying him was his excuse to prevent her from leaving here, because there were no intruders on the 19th floor. It was absolutely safe and quiet here. She could lie to herself, ignore the messy situation out there, but she knew that she was just deceiving herself. Time will make people forget everything. Carlos received the documents on the computer and said to Alice, who was peeling apple absently. Before Alice could react, Carlos had snatched the apple from her hand. If you keep peeling it, you'll only have the apple core. Alice finally recovered from her thought. She put down the fruit knife and wiped her hands. You're hungry, right? I'll go buy you some food. She had to find something to do so that she wouldn't fill her head with crazy thoughts. When she got to the door, she stopped and walked back slowly. I'd better not go out. I think someone will help you prepare the food. Carlos wanted to get up. He was working on the computer with his body tilted. He had some difficulty, and he was very tired. Alice rushed to help him put a pillow on his back, but she accidentally touched his back. He groaned with pain. Did I hurt you? I'm sorry. I'm so stupid. She apologized at once, but then she felt something was wrong. Shouldn't the wound of appendicitis surgery be in front? I sit for a long time, so my back is sore, he said lightly, and he commanded Alice to pour him a glass of water. Alice poured him some water at once. It's too hot. He tightened his nose critically. I'll cool it down for you. Don't spit in the water, he said with a cold face, disgustedly. Alice quickly shut up her mouth and used her hand to cool the glass of hot water down. She peeped at him. He was so picky. She criticized him for being so tough silently. Carlos looked at her, who was being blamed but still obedient. He felt she was really cute. She put the warm water in his hand. He touched the glass and shook his head discontentedly. It's a little cold. Alice pouted her mouth angrily. You're hard to serve. Carlos raised his eyes and said, oh, you got some bad temper. That's how you treat your lifesaver. Alice took back the glass in his hand, poured out half of the warm water, and added some hot water into it. She felt that the temperature was all right, and she put the glass on the bedside table. But he was even more dissatisfied. You are not doing it right. I only drink the water of 40 degrees. Alice nodded hard and searched everywhere in the ward. What are you looking for? He was curious. Thermometer, I'll give it to you after measuring the temperature. Carlos shook his head and suddenly felt that she had no skills to serve him. What did the old proverb say? Rotten wood cannot be carved. He stopped paying attention to her and continued to deal with the documents on the computer. After a long time, Alice seemed to have figured out something, and she said, I thought about it. I'll go back because my mother would worry about me. I have to take care of her. After that, she walked out directly without asking Carlos's permission. She arrived at the door, which was pushed open. It was Aunt Mary who was carrying a lunchbox. Alice was kind of shocked, but Aunt Mary just nodded at her slightly, and then she entered the room quietly. She set the table on the bed and put all the dishes that she made in the box on the table. Aunt Mary carefully picked out the carrots in the stir-fried vegetables and skimmed the tiny fat from the soup. Only then did she fill a bowl of soup and put it in front of Carlos. Alice looked at them with her head tilted. She was criticizing Carlos for being so picky. At the same time, she was wondering why Aunt Mary knew Carlos's preferences so well. Obviously, they were familiar with each other. Aunt Mary was appointed by Carlos, so there was no surprise. She went out quietly. She stood at the window and watched Carlos having the soup. The red light of the setting sun outside shone on his handsome profile, forming a very distinct line of light and shade, which showed his prominent facial features perfectly. Alice found that he was about to look up, so she ran away quickly and escaped back to the 9th floor, her mother's ward. Her brother had returned to the ward, and he told her mother about what happened outside. Sarah asked Alice about it, but she answered with a smile. The journalists got the wrong guys. Brother didn't know what was going on. He thought they were intercepting us. Really? Sarah had long noticed that Alice acted very strangely these days. Alice hurriedly took a book to read. She pretended that she didn't care. We are nobody. Why would those journalists want to stop us? At night, David came. They sat on the bench of the corridor, silent. Give me my phone. There are some things I need to face myself, Alice said softly. David hesitated. I don't know how to protect you. You've done enough for me. You'd better not be involved in this. Alice, I've decided. I'll announce that you're my girlfriend. This time, he would not shrink back. He had made all preparations these days, and he would stand up to protect Alice. David. Alice looked back at David. The affection in his eyes couldn't be covered anymore. Alice could only move away quickly. She had known David since she was a child. He came from a prominent family, family, and he was the fourth generation of this rich family. He had a strict family education since he was a child. His family didn't like him playing with ordinary people. Now, something like this came out. If he stood up, he was against his family. She couldn't let David make such a sacrifice. "Don't meddle in my affairs." Alice stood up coldly with her phone back in her hand. David grabbed her hand. Her hand was so small and soft. Once you hold it in your palm, you wouldn't want to let it go. He held on her hand tight and passed his feelings to her along his palm, which made her shudder. "You know it. Why you just pretend not to see it? Why should I choose not to spell it out?" David smiled bitterly. He stood up, but he didn't let go of Alice's hand. He stared at Alice affectionately. "Alice, if it hadn't happened, In his voice, there was a trace of pain. "We should have been together." Alice turned around in a hurry, holding back the pain in her heart and trying to smile. But her eyes turned red.